In the heart of a bustling city, nestled among towering skyscrapers, stood an office building that buzzed with activity from morning till night. This was where Sarah worked, a diligent and hard-working woman in her early 30s who had learned to navigate life's challenges with quiet determination. Every day she arrived at the office before sunrise, often carrying a thermos of coffee and a small notebook filled with tasks she needed to complete. Her colleagues admired her work ethic, but rarely stopped to ask how she managed to stay so committed despite her exhausting schedule. Sarah wasn't just working one job. She was juggling 2 shifts back to back. By day, she handled administrative duties for the company, ensuring files were organized, emails were answered, and meetings ran smoothly. As soon as her first shift ended, she transitioned into her second role, answering customer service calls for the same organization. The hours were long, sometimes stretching well past midnight, but Sarah didn't complain. She knew what was at stake. Her family depended on her income to survive. Her days started early, often before the sun peeked over the horizon. After waking up her 2 young children, she made sure they were fed and ready for school. Then, with a quick kiss goodbye, she rushed off to catch the bus that would take her to work. On most days, Sarah skipped breakfast herself, saving both time and money. Lunch breaks were rare luxuries, and when they did happen, she spent them catching up on pending tasks instead of eating. Hunger gnawed at her stomach more often than not, but she pushed through it, telling herself that this sacrifice was temporary. One particular afternoon, after finishing her first shift, Sarah found herself sitting alone at her desk during a brief lull between responsibilities. Her stomach growled loudly, reminding her that she hadn't eaten anything substantial all day. Embarrassed, she glanced around to see if anyone had noticed. Most of her co-workers were either busy chatting or heading out for lunch, their laughter echoing through the open-plan office. Feeling out of place amidst the cheerful chatter, Sarah hesitated. She couldn't afford to buy food today, not after paying for her son's school supplies earlier in the week. Desperate, she approached a co-worker named Mia, who had brought leftovers from home. "Hey, Mia," Sarah said softly, trying to sound casual. Do you have any extra food? I forgot mine today." Mia smiled kindly and handed over half of her sandwich without hesitation. Grateful but embarrassed, Sarah retreated to her desk, nibbling on the bread while pretending to focus on her computer screen. Little did she know, someone else had been watching. James, the CEO of the company, happened to be walking through the office floor that afternoon. He wasn't a man who typically interacted with employees outside of formal meetings or presentations. To many, he seemed distant, an imposing figure who cared more about quarterly reports than individual lives. But today, something caught his attention. From across the room, he observed Sarah quietly asking for food, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment as she accepted the sandwich from Mia. It was such a fleeting moment, yet it lingered in James's mind long after he returned to his corner office. That evening, as Sarah prepared to clock in for her second shift, she felt a mix of exhaustion and pride. Despite the physical toll of working double shifts, she reminded herself why she kept going. Her children deserved stability, education, and opportunities she never had growing up. Still, moments like the one earlier, with Mia's sandwich, were humbling reminders of how precarious her situation truly was. She tried not to dwell on it too much, focusing instead on the tasks ahead. Meanwhile, upstairs in his lavish office, James sat staring out the window, lost in thought. He couldn't shake the image of Sarah shyly accepting food from a co-worker. It wasn't just the act itself that struck him, it was the vulnerability behind it. In all his years as CEO, he had never considered the personal struggles of his employees beyond surface-level concerns like performance reviews or promotions. Now he wondered, how many others like Sarah were silently battling hardships while putting on a brave face at work? As the sun dipped below the skyline, casting golden hues over the city, James decided to dig deeper. He didn't want to approach Sarah directly. Not yet. Instead, he resolved to learn more about her life outside of work. What drove her to take on such grueling hours? Was there anything the company could do to ease her burden? Questions swirled in his mind, each one fueling a growing sense of responsibility. For the first time in years, James felt a spark of genuine curiosity about someone other than himself. The next few days passed uneventfully for Sarah. She continued her routine, balancing work and family with practiced precision. Yet, unbeknownst to her, James had begun piecing together fragments of her story through discreet inquiries with HR. He discovered that Sarah lived in a modest neighborhood far from the gleaming offices where she spent her days. Intrigued and perhaps a little guilty, he decided to pay her a visit, not as a CEO, but as someone seeking to understand the human side of his business. Though neither Sarah nor James realized it yet, their paths were about to cross in ways neither could have anticipated. The encounter at work had planted a seed, a moment of connection that would soon blossom into something transformative. For now, however, Sarah remained focused on surviving another double shift, while James wrestled with the weight of newfound awareness. Both were unaware of the profound impact this chance interaction would have on their lives, and the lives of countless others within the company. The decision weighed heavily on James's mind as he sat in his office late one evening, staring at the stack of reports that usually demanded his attention. But tonight, those papers remained untouched. His thoughts kept returning to Sarah, the quiet desperation in her voice when she asked for food, the way her cheeks flushed with embarrassment, and the dignity she maintained despite her obvious struggle. It wasn't just curiosity gnawing at him, it was something deeper, a mix of guilt, responsibility, and an unfamiliar urge to act. James had always prided himself on being a leader who made data-driven decisions. Numbers were safe, predictable, and easy to control. People, on the other hand, were messy. Emotions, personal lives, and struggles. These were things he preferred to leave outside the boardroom. Yet here he was, unable to ignore the reality of what he'd witnessed. He couldn't shake the feeling that behind every name on his payroll, there might be another story like Sarah's. A story of resilience, sacrifice, and silent suffering. For hours, James debated with himself about what to do next. Should he call Sarah into his office and ask directly about her situation? No, that felt too intrusive, too much like prying under the guise of concern. Besides, if their roles were reversed, would he want someone poking into his private life? Probably not. What about delegating the task to HR? They could discreetly offer support without involving him personally, but something about that idea didn't sit right either. If this was going to mean anything, if it was going to truly make a difference, it needed to come from him. Not as a CEO making policy changes, but as a human being reaching out to another. Finally, after much deliberation, James settled on a plan. He decided to visit Sarah's home unannounced, not to confront her or demand answers, but simply to see for himself, to understand. It wasn't a decision he took lightly. In fact, the thought of stepping into an employee's personal space made him uneasy. He had never done anything like this before. The closest he'd come to interacting with employees outside of work was attending company-sponsored events, where conversations revolved around performance metrics and future goals. This was entirely different. This was raw, real, and unpredictable. The following day, James quietly requested Sarah's address from HR, citing vague reasons about improving workplace policies. He knew it was a stretch, but no one questioned him. After all, he was the CEO. His word was rarely challenged. With the address in hand, he spent the rest of the day preparing for the visit. He stopped by a local grocery store on his way home, filling a bag with essentials: rice, pasta, canned goods, fresh fruits, and even a few treats for children. As he stood in the checkout line, clutching the plastic bags, he felt a strange sense of nervousness. Was this the right thing to do? Would Sarah see it as kindness or intrusion? There was no way to know until he showed up at her door. That evening, as dusk settled over the city, James climbed into his car and began the drive to Sarah's neighborhood. The route took him through parts of town he rarely visited, areas where the streets were narrower, the buildings older, and the lights dimmer. As he navigated unfamiliar roads, He noticed small details that told stories of struggle and perseverance. Clotheslines hung between windows, makeshift repairs patched cracked walls, and children played barefoot in the alleys. Each scene tugged at his conscience, reminding him how sheltered his own life had been. When he finally arrived at Sarah's building, James parked his car and stepped out, clutching the grocery bag tightly. The structure loomed before him, a faded brick facade with peeling paint and broken railings. A flickering street lamp cast uneven shadows across the sidewalk, highlighting cracks in the pavement. For a moment, James hesitated, suddenly aware of how out of place he must look. Dressed in a tailored suit and polished shoes, he was worlds away from the environment surrounding him. He wondered if anyone inside recognized his car, an expensive luxury model that seemed wildly inappropriate for this setting. Taking a deep breath, James approached the entrance. The lobby was cramped and poorly lit, its air thick with the scent of dampness and age. Mailboxes lined one wall, their labels handwritten and smudged. James located Sarah's name among them and noted the apartment number scrawled beside it. Upstairs, the hallway stretched long and narrow, illuminated by a single bulb that buzzed faintly. Doors were shut tight, some adorned with locks and chains that spoke of caution rather than trust. Standing outside Sarah's door, James felt a wave of uncertainty wash over him. What if she refused to let him in? What if she interpreted his visit as judgment rather than compassion? Before he could second-guess himself further, James knocked gently. The sound echoed softly against the worn walls, followed by a brief silence. Then came the shuffle of footsteps, hesitant and cautious. When the door opened, Sarah stood there, her expression shifting rapidly from confusion to shock. "Mr. Carter?" she stammered, clearly taken aback. What are you doing here?" James held up the grocery bag, offering a sheepish smile. "I'm sorry for showing up like this," he began, his voice steady but tinged with awkwardness. I wanted to check on you and I brought some groceries, thought they might help." Sarah blinked, unsure how to respond. Her initial surprise gave way to discomfort as she glanced down at the bag, then back at James. "You didn't have to do this," she said quietly, though her tone carried a hint of gratitude. She stepped aside reluctantly, inviting him in. "Please come in." Inside, the apartment was modest but tidy, its limited furnishings arranged with care. Toys lay scattered near a small table, evidence of the playful energy of children. A worn couch occupied one corner of the room, while a tiny kitchenette hugged the opposite wall. Despite the lack of space, there was a warmth to the place, a sense of home crafted through love and effort rather than material wealth. James set the groceries down on the counter, feeling increasingly self-conscious. Every detail of the apartment seemed to reinforce the disparity between his world and Sarah's. Here was a woman who worked tirelessly for the company he led, yet lived in conditions far removed from the comfort and security he took for granted. Guilt swirled within him, mingling with admiration for her strength and resourcefulness. "I hope you don't mind me stopping by," James said, breaking the silence. "I've been thinking about you since I saw you at work the other day." Sarah nodded slowly, still processing the surreal nature of the situation. "It's fine," she replied, though her voice betrayed a mix of emotions: gratitude, embarrassment, and perhaps a touch of defensiveness. "But really, you didn't need to bring anything. We get by." James studied her face, noting the lines of fatigue etched beneath her eyes, and the slight tremor in her hands as she smoothed her hair. "Getting by isn't the same as thriving," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "And honestly, Sarah, I think you deserve more than just getting by." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, almost instinctively, Sarah gestured toward the couch. "Would you like to sit down?" she offered, her tone softening slightly. "Can I get you something to drink?" James shook his head, declining politely. "No, thank you. I won't stay long. I wanted to see this for myself, to understand." He paused, searching for the right words. "You're incredibly hardworking, Sarah. Everyone sees that. But I realized I don't really know you or anyone else in the company as well as I should. That's my fault, and I want to change that." Sarah listened intently, her guard beginning to lower. She hadn't expected such vulnerability from her boss, especially not in her own living room. Slowly, tentatively, she began to share bits of her story, not because she owed him anything, but because his sincerity disarmed her. She spoke of losing her husband years ago, leaving her to raise their children alone, of medical bills that drained their savings and forced her to take on extra shifts, of the sacrifices she made daily, knowing her kids relied on her completely. As she talked, James absorbed every word, his heart growing heavier with each revelation. By the time she finished, he understood why she worked so hard, and why she hid her struggles so carefully. This wasn't just about survival. It was about dignity, pride, and protecting her family from judgment. Leaving the apartment that night, James carried not only the weight of Sarah's story, but also a renewed determination to make a difference for her and for everyone else whose battles remained unseen. The moment James stepped into Sarah's apartment, he was struck by the stark contrast between her world and his own. The space was tiny, barely larger than his home office, but it radiated a sense of warmth that no amount of luxury could replicate. Every corner seemed carefully curated, not with expensive decor but with love and resourcefulness. A small bookshelf stood against one wall, filled with worn children's books and handmade crafts. On the table lay crayon drawings, their vibrant colors brightening the otherwise modest surroundings. Yet despite its charm, there was an undeniable air of scarcity, a reminder of the challenges Sarah faced daily. Sarah led James to the couch, which sagged slightly under his weight as he sat down. She offered him water or tea, insisting on hospitality even in her humble circumstances. He declined politely, still holding the grocery bag he'd brought. It felt heavier now, not because of its contents, but because of the gravity of the situation. As Sarah settled into a chair across from him, James noticed how tired she looked up close. Her eyes, though kind and resilient, carried shadows of sleepless nights and endless worry. This wasn't just fatigue. It was the toll of years spent carrying burdens far greater than anyone at work could have imagined. James glanced around the room again, taking in details he hadn't noticed before. The kitchen shelves were nearly empty, save for a few cans of soup and a half-empty jar of peanut butter. A single pot simmered on the stove, releasing the faint aroma of rice cooking. A meal so simple yet likely the centerpiece of their dinner. In the corner, two young children played quietly, giggling softly as they built towers out of mismatched blocks. They wore clothes that had clearly been patched multiple times, yet their laughter was pure and carefree. To them, this apartment wasn't a symbol of struggle. It was home. "I didn't realize," James said finally, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost hesitant, as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace of the moment. "I mean, I knew people worked hard, but I never thought about what happens after they leave here." Sarah nodded slowly, her expression softening. She didn't seem angry or resentful toward him, just weary, as though explaining her life was another task added to her already overwhelming list. "Most people don't," she replied gently. "And honestly, I prefer it that way. I don't want anyone to feel sorry for me. I'm doing what I have to do for my kids." Her words hit James like a punch to the gut. What I have to do, not what she wanted, not what she dreamed of, but what she had to do. He couldn't imagine living like this, balancing double shifts while raising two children alone. How did she find the strength? And how many others like her were silently enduring similar hardships? As the conversation continued, Sarah opened up more, sharing fragments of her story. She spoke of losing her husband unexpectedly 5 years ago, leaving her widowed with 2 toddlers to care for. Medical bills from his illness wiped out their savings, forcing her to sell their house and move into this cramped apartment. Since then, she'd juggled jobs, often working well beyond her limits just to keep food on the table and clothes on her children's backs. Despite everything, She remained determined to give her kids a better future, one free of the struggles. She endured. Listening to her, James felt a mix of emotions: guilt for not noticing sooner, admiration for her resilience, and frustration at himself for being so disconnected from the realities of his employees' lives. He realized now that Sarah wasn't just an isolated case. There were likely dozens, if not hundreds, of workers in his company facing similar struggles, hiding their pain behind smiles and professionalism. How had he missed it all these years? His gaze drifted back to the children who had abandoned their blocks and were now coloring pictures at the table. One of them, a little girl with curly hair, held up her drawing proudly. "Look, Mommy," she exclaimed, showing Sarah a scribbled image of a family standing under a rainbow. Sarah smiled, her face lighting up with genuine joy. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," she said, tucking the paper safely onto the fridge with a magnet shaped like a flower. Watching this exchange, James felt something shift inside him. These weren't just statistics or payroll numbers. They were real people with hopes, dreams, and fears. Sarah wasn't defined by her job title or her salary. She was a mother, a provider, and a fighter. Her strength wasn't measured in promotions or bonuses, but in the sacrifices she made every single day. After a while, Sarah excused herself to check on dinner. James used the opportunity to take in the full scope of her living conditions. The walls were thin, allowing faint sounds from neighboring apartments to seep through. A leaky faucet dripped steadily in the sink, its rhythm blending with the hum of the refrigerator. Despite the challenges, the space was clean and organized, a testament to Sarah's determination to create stability for her family. Even the smallest details, the neatly folded blankets on the couch, the shoes lined up by the door, spoke volumes about her character. When Sarah returned, she carried a plate of steaming rice and beans, setting it on the table for her children. James watched as they eagerly dug in, their faces lighting up with delight over such a simple meal. It was a scene that would have gone unnoticed in most households, but here, it felt monumental, a celebration of survival, of making do with what little they had. "You're amazing, Sarah," James said suddenly, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I don't say that lightly. Most people wouldn't be able to handle half of what you deal with and still manage to smile." Sarah chuckled softly, brushing off the compliment. "It's not about being amazing," she replied. "It's about doing what needs to be done." "You'd do the same if you were in my shoes." James shook his head, unconvinced. "I'm not sure I could," he admitted. "Honestly, I've lived a pretty sheltered life. My biggest worry is usually whether we'll meet our quarterly targets. Seeing this, it puts things into perspective." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of the conversation hung in the air, heavy but necessary. James knew he couldn't undo the past or erase the struggles Sarah had endured, but he also knew he couldn't walk away unchanged. Something had to be done, not just for Sarah, but for everyone else like her, The evening drew to a close. James rose to leave, thanking Sarah once again for letting him into her home. "This visit, it means a lot to me," he said earnestly, "more than you probably realize. Thank you for trusting me enough to share your story." Sarah nodded, a hint of gratitude in her eyes. "Thank you for caring," she replied simply. Not many people would. Walking back to his car, James replayed the night's events in his mind. Every detail, the near-empty shelves, the patched-up clothes, the laughter of Sarah's children, was etched into his memory. He felt a renewed sense of purpose, a determination to bridge the gap between the corporate world he led and the human stories that fueled it. What he'd seen tonight wasn't just a glimpse into Sarah's life. It was a wake-up call, urging him to rethink everything he thought he knew about leadership, empathy, and responsibility. The next morning, James arrived at the office earlier than usual. The city was still waking up. Streetlights flickered off as sunlight stretched across the skyline, but his mind was already racing. He couldn't shake the images from Sarah's apartment. The worn furniture, the sparse kitchen shelves, the laughter of her children echoing in a room filled with love but little else. It wasn't just sadness that weighed on him. It was a deep sense of responsibility. For years, he had led his company with precision and ambition, focusing on profit margins, growth charts, and shareholder satisfaction. But now he realized those metrics told only half the story. They didn't account for the sacrifices employees made to keep the business running smoothly. Seated at his desk, James stared at the stack of reports in front of him. Usually, these documents were his lifeline. The numbers represented success, failure, opportunities, and risks. Today, however, they felt hollow. What good were profits if they came at the expense of people like Sarah? How could he claim to lead a thriving organization when some of its hardest workers were struggling to put food on their tables? These questions gnawed at him, demanding answers he wasn't sure he was ready to give. Determined to act, James called an emergency meeting with his senior leadership team. When they gathered in the boardroom later that morning, they found him pacing near the window, his expression unusually serious. This wasn't the calm, collected CEO they were used to seeing. Something was different, and it showed in the way he addressed them. "I need your full attention," James began, turning to face the group. "What I'm about to say may sound unconventional, but I want you to hear me out." His tone caught everyone off guard. Normally, meetings started with updates on quarterly earnings or strategies for expanding market share. Today, though, James launched into a topic none of them expected: employee well-being. He recounted his visit to Sarah's home, omitting specific details to protect her privacy but emphasizing the broader picture. He described the challenges she faced: working double shifts, raising 2 children alone, and living paycheck to paycheck, all while maintaining professionalism and dedication at work. "This isn't just about one person," James continued, his voice firm yet compassionate. "It's about recognizing that behind every name on our payroll is a human being with struggles we might not see. We pride ourselves on being a successful company. But what does that success mean if we're leaving our people behind?" Room fell silent. Some executives exchanged uneasy glances, unsure how to respond. Others scribbled notes, trying to process what James was proposing. One of them, a seasoned CFO named Margaret, finally spoke up. "James, I understand where you're coming from, but implementing changes like this will impact our bottom line. We can't ignore the financial implications." James nodded, acknowledging her point. "You're right. We have to be realistic. But let me ask you this. What's the cost of ignoring these issues entirely? If we lose talented employees because they can't sustain themselves, or if morale plummets because people feel undervalued, how much will that cost us in the long run?" Margaret hesitated, unable to counter his logic. Another executive, Robert, chimed in. "So, what exactly are you suggesting? More benefits? Higher wages? Those aren't easy fixes." James leaned forward, his eyes scanning the room. "I'm not asking for quick fixes. I'm talking about systemic change. Let's start by improving compensation for overtime work. Many of our employees take extra shifts to make ends meet, and we should reward that effort fairly. Next, let's introduce subsidized childcare services. Single parents like Sarah shouldn't have to choose between earning a living and caring for their kids. And finally, I want to establish an anonymous assistance program, an initiative where employees in need can access financial support without fear of judgment or repercussions." The ideas sparked a lively debate. Some executives argued that such initiatives would strain resources and complicate operations. Others pointed out potential logistical hurdles, particularly with implementing childcare subsidies. But James remained steadfast, countering each objection with data and reasoning. He cited studies showing that companies investing in employee welfare saw higher retention rates, increased productivity, and stronger workplace cultures. He reminded them that treating employees as valued partners, not just cogs in a machine, wasn't just ethical, it was good business. As the discussion unfolded, something remarkable happened. Slowly but surely, the resistance began to fade. Even Margaret, who had initially voiced concerns about costs, admitted that James's proposals aligned with the company's core values of integrity and innovation. By the end of the meeting, the team agreed to draft a comprehensive plan addressing James's suggestions. They committed to presenting it to the board within the week, along with a detailed analysis of its potential impact. That evening, James returned to his office, exhausted but hopeful. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Implementing these changes would require time, effort, and compromise, but he felt confident they were moving in the right direction. For the first time in years, he didn't measure success solely by revenue figures or stock prices. Instead, he envisioned a workplace where employees felt supported, respected, and empowered to thrive both professionally and personally. A few days later, James invited Sarah to his office, not to discuss her performance or assign new tasks, but simply to thank her. When she arrived, visibly nervous, he gestured for her to sit down. "Relax," he said with a warm smile. "This isn't a formal meeting. I just wanted to tell you how much your courage has inspired me." Sarah looked surprised. "Inspired you?" she repeated, her voice tinged with disbelief. "I'm just doing my job." James shook his head. "No, you're doing so much more than that. You've shown incredible strength and resilience, and you've reminded me of something important. That true leadership isn't about numbers or titles, it's about people. Because of you, we're making some changes around here. Changes that will hopefully make life a little easier for everyone." He went on to explain the initiatives they were developing, from better pay for overtime work to the new assistance programs. Sarah listened intently, her eyes widening with each detail. For once, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice trembling with emotion. "I never imagined anything like this could happen." James smiled, though there was a hint of humility in his expression. "Don't thank me yet. There's still a lot of work to do, but I promise you this. Your story won't be forgotten. It's going to help shape the future of this company." As Sarah left his office, she felt a weight lift slightly from her shoulders. She knew life wouldn't magically become easier overnight, but for the first time in years, she dared to believe that things might improve, not just for her, but for others like her. Meanwhile, James returned to his desk, reflecting on the journey ahead. He understood now that leadership wasn't about wielding power. It was about using influence to create positive change. And though the path forward would undoubtedly be challenging, he was ready to walk it, one step at a time. Weeks turned into months, and the changes James had proposed began to take shape. At first, they were subtle, small adjustments that hinted at bigger things to come. Employees started noticing improvements in their paychecks, particularly those who worked overtime. For years, they'd accepted meager compensation for extra hours, telling themselves it was simply part of the job. Now, however, they saw a noticeable increase, a sign that their efforts were finally being recognized and valued. The response was immediate and heartfelt. Conversations around the water cooler shifted from complaints about long hours to expressions of gratitude. "Did you see this?" one employee whispered to another, holding up their paycheck stub with a grin. "It's like they actually care." But the changes didn't stop there. One Monday morning, an email landed in every employee's inbox announcing the launch of a new childcare subsidy program. Designed specifically to support working parents, the initiative offered financial assistance for daycare services, after-school programs, and even summer camps. For Sarah, this was life-changing. Up until now, she'd relied on a patchwork of babysitters and favors from neighbors to ensure her children were cared for while she worked. It had always been a source of stress, forcing her to juggle schedules and worry about whether her kids were safe and happy. With the new program, though, she could enroll them in a nearby daycare center without worrying about how to afford it. When she picked up her children after work that evening, she found them giggling over finger paintings and building blocks. Their joy was contagious, and for the first time in years, Sarah felt a sense of relief, a weight lifted off her shoulders. The third major change came in the form of an anonymous assistance program. Modeled after similar initiatives at larger corporations, it allowed employees to apply for confidential financial aid during times of crisis. Whether it was medical bills, car repairs, or unexpected housing costs, the program ensured no one had to face these challenges alone. What made it unique was its emphasis on privacy. Applicants submitted their requests through an encrypted portal, and approvals were handled discreetly by a dedicated team within HR. Word spread quickly, not through official announcements but through quiet whispers of gratitude. One employee, a single father named Daniel, used the program to cover his mother's emergency surgery. Another, a young woman named Priya, received help when her apartment flooded and she needed temporary housing. These stories rarely reached James directly, but he heard enough to know the program was making a difference. Back at the office, morale soared. People seemed lighter, less burdened by the invisible struggles that once weighed them down. Smiles became more frequent, conversations warmer. Even the atmosphere felt different, less transactional, more human. Employees who once kept to themselves began forming connections, sharing experiences and offering support. Lunch breaks turned into opportunities to bond, rather than rush through meals. In meetings, voices grew bolder as individuals felt empowered to contribute ideas without fear of judgment. James noticed these shifts keenly. Walking through the office floors, he no longer saw rows of heads bent over keyboards in strained silence. Instead, he observed collaboration, laughter, and a renewed sense of purpose. For James himself, the transformation was profound. Once seen as distant and unapproachable, he now earned a reputation as a leader who truly cared. He made it a point to spend less time holed up in his corner office and more time engaging with employees. Whether it was stopping by someone's desk to ask how their weekend went or joining a team meeting to listen to project updates, he made his presence felt, not as an authority figure but as a colleague invested in their success. His actions spoke louder than words. When Sarah approached him one afternoon to express her gratitude for the recent changes, he responded with characteristic humility. "This isn't about me," he said. "It's about all of us. We're stronger together." Word of the company's transformation eventually reached outside its walls. Local media outlets picked up on the story, highlighting the innovative programs and praising James's leadership. Articles appeared in business journals, social media posts went viral, and soon, other organizations began reaching out for advice on implementing similar initiatives. Competitors, once dismissive of such soft approaches, found themselves rethinking their own strategies. After all, if a company could thrive financially and foster a culture of empathy, why shouldn't others strive for the same? Still, not everyone was immediately convinced. Some executives grumbled privately about the cost of the new programs, questioning whether the benefits outweighed the expenses. A few longtime managers resisted the shift, clinging to outdated notions of hierarchy and control. But over time, even skeptics began to see the results. Productivity soared as employees poured passion into their work. Turnover rates plummeted, saving the company significant recruitment and training costs. Most importantly, the workplace buzzed with energy, a tangible reminder that happy, supported employees were also highly effective ones. One day, during a town hall meeting, James took the stage to address the entire staff. Standing before hundreds of faces, he reflected on the journey they'd undertaken together. "When I first walked into this role," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "I thought success meant hitting targets and growing profits. And while those things are important, I've learned something far greater. True success is measured by the impact we have on each other's lives. None of these changes would have happened without your resilience, your feedback, and your willingness to trust me, even when I didn't deserve it." The room erupted in applause, a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. Tears welled in James's eyes as he scanned the crowd, recognizing familiar faces and remembering the stories behind them. There was Sarah, seated near the front, her children tucked under her arms. There was Daniel, nodding appreciatively, his posture relaxed for the first time in years. And there were countless others whose names James might not have known, but whose contributions shaped the very foundation of the company. As the meeting concluded, James stepped down from the stage and mingled with the crowd. People thanked him, hugged him, and shared anecdotes about how the changes had impacted their lives. One young intern shyly approached him, clutching a notebook. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice trembling, "you've inspired me to be a better leader someday. Thank you for showing us what's possible." James smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You already are," he replied. "Leadership isn't about titles, it's about action. Keep going." By the end of the day, James returned to his office feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. The road ahead would undoubtedly present new challenges, but he faced them with confidence. He understood now that leadership wasn't a destination. It was a continuous process of listening, learning, and adapting. And as long as he stayed committed to putting people first, he knew the company and everyone in it would continue to flourish. Months turned into a year, and the ripple effects of James's decisions continued to spread throughout the company. What had started as small changes, better pay for overtime, childcare subsidies, and anonymous assistance programs, had grown into something far greater, a cultural shift that transformed not just policies but people. Employees who once felt invisible now walked through the office doors with their heads held high, knowing their efforts were seen and appreciated. Conversations around the water cooler were no longer about complaints or frustrations. Instead, they revolved around shared victories, personal milestones, and dreams for the future. For Sarah, life began to change in ways she hadn't dared to imagine. With the new childcare program covering most of her kids' daycare costs, she could finally breathe easier. Her mornings became less chaotic, her evenings more peaceful. For the first time in years, she didn't have to rush home from work only to scramble through household chores. Instead, she found herself sitting down at the dinner table with her children, truly present, listening to their stories about school and playtime. The laughter that filled her tiny apartment felt richer, fuller, as if joy itself had reclaimed its rightful place in their lives. At work, Sarah noticed a difference too. Colleagues who barely acknowledged her before now greeted her warmly, stopping by her desk to chat or offering help when she seemed overwhelmed. She wasn't just the employee working double shifts anymore. She was Sarah, a valued member of the team. One day during a company-wide meeting, James publicly thanked her, not for her productivity or efficiency, but for inspiring him to rethink what it meant to lead. As he spoke her name, the entire room erupted in applause, leaving Sarah momentarily speechless. It was a moment of validation she'd never expected, one that reminded her of her worth beyond the hours she clocked in. The changes weren't limited to Sarah, though. Across departments, employees began sharing how the initiatives had impacted their lives. A young mother named Lisa tearfully recounted how the child care subsidy allowed her to return to work after maternity leave without worrying about finances. An older employee named Tom revealed that the Anonymous Assistance Program helped him cover medical bills when his wife fell ill. Even those who hadn't directly benefited from the programs felt the positive energy. They saw coworkers thriving, and it inspired them to push harder, dream bigger, and support one another. James, too, underwent a transformation. Once known as a distant figurehead, he became someone employees trusted and respected. He made it a habit to walk the floors regularly, asking questions, learning names, and remembering details about people's lives. When an intern mentioned struggling with public speaking, James invited her to shadow him during meetings so she could observe his techniques. When a janitor casually mentioned his passion for photography, James arranged for him to display his work in the lobby gallery. These gestures, though small, carried immense weight. They showed that everyone mattered regardless of rank or title. Outside the company, word of the transformation spread like wildfire. Business magazines hailed James as a visionary leader, praising his commitment to fostering a workplace rooted in empathy and humanity. Competitors scrambled to replicate his strategies, while industry leaders sought his advice on creating similar cultures within their own organizations. Yet despite the accolades, James remained grounded. In interviews, he consistently redirected praise to his team, emphasizing that true leadership meant empowering others to shine. One evening, during the company's annual gala, James delivered a speech that would later be quoted in countless articles and seminars. Standing beneath twinkling lights, surrounded by hundreds of smiling faces, he reflected on the journey they'd taken together. "When I first decided to visit Sarah's home, he began, pausing to let the significance of his words sink in. I didn't know where it would lead. All I knew was that something had to change. But looking out at all of you tonight, I realized this wasn't just about making our workplace better. It was about proving that kindness isn't weakness. Empathy isn't optional. And success isn't measured by numbers alone. It's measured by the lives we touch. His voice cracked slightly as he continued. Every single one of you has taught me something valuable over the past year. You've shown me resilience, courage, and heart. Because of you, I'm not just a CEO, I'm a better person. The room erupted in cheers, some people rising to their feet, others wiping away tears. Sarah stood near the front, clutching her children's hands tightly, overwhelmed by emotion. This man, who had once been nothing more than a distant authority figure, had changed her life, and the lives of so many others, in ways she couldn't have predicted. As the night drew to a close, James mingled with guests, shaking hands, hugging colleagues, and posing for photos. But amidst the celebration, he took a quiet moment to step outside onto the balcony. Leaning against the railing, he gazed out at the city skyline, lit up like a constellation of stars. His mind wandered back to the early days of his career, when success had seemed synonymous with wealth and power. Now, he understood differently. Success wasn't about climbing higher or accumulating more. It was about lifting others as you rose. A soft voice interrupted his thoughts. Turning, he saw Sarah approaching, her children trailing behind her. Mr. Carter, she said, smiling. Shyly, we just wanted to say thank you, again. James knelt down to meet her children's eyes, offering them a warm smile. You don't have to thank me, he replied gently. Your mom is the real hero here. She's the one who inspires us all. Sarah blushed, brushing off the compliment, as she always did. But deep down she believed him. Over the past year, she'd rediscovered her strength, her purpose, and her ability to hope again. And she knew she wasn't alone. Countless others had found renewed confidence and joy because of the changes James had championed. In the weeks and months that followed, the company continued to thrive. Revenue grew steadily, retention rates soared, and innovation flourished. But the greatest measure of success lay in the intangibles, the smiles, the connections, the sense of belonging that permeated every corner of the organization. James often thought about the day he'd knocked on Sarah's door, unsure of what he'd find. That simple act of curiosity had sparked a chain reaction, proving that even the smallest steps toward understanding could create waves of lasting impact. Years later, when James retired, he left behind a legacy that extended far beyond profits and accolades. He had built a workplace where people mattered, not just as workers but as human beings. And in doing so, he reminded everyone, including himself, of a timeless truth. Leadership isn't about ruling from above. It's about walking alongside others hand in hand toward a brighter future.